Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Mattson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. There's this pull amongst female leaders, really trying to balance the gifts and steward the talents we have, the visions that God has given us, and also be home with our families. I work with young leaders who are in their early 20s, and they're like, I really want to do this well. I don't want to screw up my kids and have them in therapy. And I'm like, well, therapy's good. But you won't screw them up if you stay present and you live within your limits and your design, and you don't chase after the constant voices around us that you've got to be all, do all, and you need to do it all now. So the idea of having a coach that comes alongside you who helps you understand your design, your story, what is healthy and versus what is toxic, spirituality and relationships. That's what we do here at Living Wholehearted. We want to help you from the inside out. We don't want to pluck weeds. We don't want to be a voice in your life that makes you do more. And we get off our calls and then you're like, man, I'm way behind. We want you to feel grace, but also have that accountability and that confidential space to be able to process who you are, the relationships in your life. We have 3 different ways that you can do this as a female leader. You can jump in with our group coaching calls once a month. It's low bar for you to come in, come out, and we usually cover some sort of specific topic that's unique to female leaders. We also have individual coaching. So you can come along, one of our coaches comes alongside you, and we do a very intentional process with you. But we're just that safe person that's going to help you to continue to grow and to lean into, again, more balance and more life, work, joy in your life. The last is our cohort. It's my favorite. And this is a very intentional combination of individual coaching, group coaching, and retreats at our Living Wholehearted Legend Retreat out in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. We'd love to have you learn more at livingwholehearted.com. It's not news to say that marriages are struggling. Statistics show that 50% of first marriages will end in divorce in and out of the church, and second marriages have an extra greater chance of ending in divorce. With 20 years as a marriage and family therapist, I've been working with couples in a wide variety of stages in their marriages and have found some key factors in whether marriages make it or not. So today we want to talk about this with a leading expert himself, Dr. Greg Smalley.
Dr. Smalley serves as Vice President of Marriage and Family Formation at Focus on the Family. In this role, he develops and oversees initiatives that prepare individuals for marriage, strengthen and nurture existing marriages, and help couples in marital crisis. Prior to joining Focus, Smalley worked for the Center for Relationship Enrichment at John Brown University, and as the president of the National Institute of Marriage. He's the author of 17 books, including Fight Your Way to a Better Marriage, The DNA of Parent and Teen Relationships, and The Wholehearted Marriage. We like that one a lot. He and his wife, Erin, co-created Ready to Wed, a complete premarital curriculum for engaged couples, and the online focus on marriage assessment. They also released a crazy little thing called Marriage, 12 Secrets to a Lifelong Romance in 2016. Married since 92, Greg and Erin live in Colorado with their 3 daughters, Taylor, Murphy, and Annie, and their son, Garrison. Dr. Smalley brings at least one child to every age-appropriate event, exposing them to the crucial role marriage plays in the family and society. Dr. Smalley, so great to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you, Jeff and Tara. Thanks for having me on.
We love it. Well, you're a leading leader in the area of focus and really on the front ends with marriages. But before we dive into that, we'd love to hear more about you and your own story. What's kind of some of those markers in your journey along the way that are shaping what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, exactly 6 days from now, Erin and I will celebrate 31 years of marriage. And so
Yeah.
we are gearing up for that. I was doing a radio program yesterday morning, and they asked about when I was married, and I said it and went, "Oh man, I have not even thought about what I'm getting her." So I did have that conversation last night. I did have that conversation with her last night, so I'm good. So I'm reminded.
Good.
I grew up in the home of a guy named Gary Smalley, who was one of the original marriage kind of gurus, experts, so I was around a lot of what he was doing, speaking, did a lot of events, and I'd hear people come up and say, "Hey, you know, Gary Smalley, you saved my marriage," and they'd give me a hug, and it was always awkward. I never quite knew what was going on, but I knew he was doing something, that was really cool. And so the older that I got, just to be able to watch just my parents, their ministry, their marriage. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And so all through college, I was headed to law school. And then kind of at the last second, switched and went into counseling and got my counseling degree. And because I would hear a lot of people would say to my dad, "Hey, I love your material, love the content, love the event, whatever." But we're stuck. Like we can't make those good principles work for us. What do we do? We'd have guys that drive RVs out and literally camp out outside of our home, saying, "I'm not leaving until I talk to Gary Smalley." And so
Wow.
kind of that obviously shaped just a real passion for couples. And then when Erin and I got married, we thought we knew it all. I was getting my doctorate, and we just thought we were going to have this really simple, easy, awesome marriage. And there was a lot of really awesomeness to it, but we struggled as well. We had a really hard first, probably 3-4 years where we poorly managed conflict, and I didn't have the words back then, but looking back, our hearts really closed to each other and started hardening. And by the grace of God, it was a mentor couple. It was this couple in our church that the woman called to talk to Erin one time, and I answered, and she said, "Hey, Greg," and her name was Carrie. I was like, "Hey, Carrie." She goes, "Hey, I'm looking for Erin," and I said, "Well, she's gone." And her response startled me because this woman goes, "Oh," she goes, "Greg, I'm so sorry to hear that. I was so afraid that was going to happen." And I remember thinking, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Like, she's gone. She's at the store. And kind of after this long, awkward pause, she said, "I'm humiliated for one," but she goes, "If I'm being honest," she goes, "my husband and I, we can just tell you guys aren't doing well. How about you come over? Let's just talk." And that really was the first time about 4 years into our marriage that we were honest, going, "We're not doing well. We're struggling. We don't know what to do. We need help." And this couple just walked with us, and we got into counseling, and we eventually turned things around. And like I said, now it's 31 years, and I have the privilege of being married to my best friend and ministry partner and all of that. But we certainly learned a lot in those early years, to say the least.
Yeah, ours was having our first child. I remember thinking we had the best marriage ever. And then, like, all my control issues came out with the revenge when we had our first baby, and that changed everything. But yeah, we had to get counseling at that point. That was about 6 years in. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also refreshing, I think, also for our listeners to hear that, this of course, there's misperceptions about what it's like to be in a family system with experts in anything,
Yeah.
right? And here's what you're saying, as a raised in the family of an expert and a guru of marriage, right out of the gate, marriage was tough, and that's just keeping it real and honest. And it sounds like that couple helped really open that door for you to walk through, which is beautiful.
And it's still,
Yeah.
we still have challenges, that beauty of I always loved it. I think marriage is the greatest adventure that any of us will ever go on. It's this amazing journey, but it's got its highs, its lows, it's hard, it's good, it both is true. Like, you guys know, I mean, when you're in that season where things are clicking and we're just enjoying each other and having a blast, and then that can shift so quickly. And then all of a sudden we're dealing with something. And as long as we're growing and just dealing with our junk that we all have as individuals, I mean, we're gonna make it and have the kind of marriage that we both want. But yeah, 31 years, we still have to grow and learn and deal with our stuff. So.
Yeah, I think we've arrived at 22 years. Right? I'm just kidding.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, we're totally in it with you. So here's the question I have. I'm hearing you kind of allude to the maybe a paradigm or a belief system that undergirds what marriage is really about. Maybe speak to that and what you see as kind of a faulty foundation for couples and one that builds a marriage that continues to help us grow.
Yeah. My oldest daughter, Taylor, and she doesn't mind me sharing this, 3 years into her marriage, her then husband came home. She's thinking they're going to celebrate, and he let her know that he was done and wanted out and wasn't willing to even get help. And so that was right as COVID hit. So not only all the craziness from COVID, that we all were facing, but we then had a daughter who was just absolutely devastated going through a divorce. And, for me, what I think is one of the greatest foundations that we can have, what I've learned through that is, I had asked this young man, really liked him, and we were close. I wrote an article called The 12 Questions That Every Father Should Ask His Future Son-in-Law. Just going, how do we do this right, walking into the marriage of our kids? And in what was, and he said all the right things. And I genuinely believe he meant every word that he said to me, that this marriage is for life, and I'll do whatever I need to do, whatever it takes to stay married. And again, I really think he meant that. But at the end of the day, when it came right down to it, he didn't live that commitment out. And what I think is one of the most important things that as we build a foundation for marriage, I think commitment walked out is not the words that I'll love you forever. I think it's our willingness to get help. I think what I now look for, because now I've done this with another daughter, and my oldest daughter, she's getting remarried here in June. But I instead of saying, hey, tell me, are you committed for life? Are you willing to get help? Are you going to get counseling? Do you have that humility that shows that I don't have all the answers, and I'm willing to go in and talk to someone and get that sort of help? To me, I think that's a better statement around commitment. And that's Erin and I keep doing that. I mean, when we hit when we hit new things and new seasons, and we'll go in and we'll talk to someone and kind of work that stuff through. So I think someone's willingness to go, I believe in counseling, I believe in mentoring, I believe in talking to friends in a small group. Like, let's do those things. To me, that is a stronger statement around commitment than me just telling my wife, which I do. I mean, I tell her all the time, hey, I'm with you till the end. And but I want her to see me doing that, not just telling her that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one.
Yeah. So it begs the question for me, because it's something that Jeff and I talk about, maybe not on the podcast yet, but we talk about all the time that the next generation, the generations behind us, are having even a harder time with commitment in general. We see it in the workplace, we see it in finishing school, we see it all over the place. And there's a lot of factors for that. And so if you're speaking to the next couple generations, the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, what would you say to them when they seem more likely to get help than previous generations? I think that's the gift that they have. Yeah. But the follow through and the long-term game is really a struggle for them. So speak to that generation.
Yeah, I would tell them the best advice I could give them is don't look for the perfect partner, become that person. In my willingness to recognize I have a lot of junk, I'm going to bring a lot of junk into a marriage, and just start dealing with that stuff. We all have it. It's there. We live in a difficult world. We all have issues growing up. I mean, all that's true. My kids, I can only imagine what they're telling their therapist, and it's okay, So instead of trying to find that perfect person, what if my focus is really on, hey, how do I keep growing as an individual, and how do I tackle whatever my stuff is, so that when I do meet someone that I do want to spend my life with, and I've already grown a lot. I'm used to that. I'm showing that I'm willing to get that sort of help. And I think that what that does for commitment, that it takes this burden off of, boy, I got to find the right person. I got to find this person who's going to love me the way that I need to be loved. And it refocuses on what I think is one of the most important parts of marriage, which is two healthy individuals can create a healthy marriage. In math, 2 negatives equal a positive. Well, that is not true for marriage. Your marriage will only be as healthy as the individuals. And so I always tell people, I think the worst question that we can ask is, how do I have a great marriage? Because that takes two. It takes Erin and me contributing and in working on our marriage. And I can't control her. Tried, and it doesn't work. But what I can control is, how am I showing up as a husband, and how am I growing, and what am I doing? And so I think the more we teach our younger generations that really a great marriage is dependent upon you really learning how to be well cared for as an individual, dealing with your junk, knowing, my wife is not my source of happiness. Always, when we do, I do a lot of premarital counseling. I do it all for our church. And I love that. And I always tell them, it freaks them out. I always tell them, I don't need my wife at all. I do not need my wife. I need the Lord. I want my wife, and I want to be married to her. But that's a very, very different thing. And I think we have a culture that teaches people that grows codependency. And
yes,
you complete me.
Oh, totally, all of that. We do. And so I think a lot of people are showing up to their marriage not understanding what it looks like to be a healthy individual, and what does that look like for me to be responsible for me to be whole, full, and healthy, and to be well cared for, and how that then can set the right foundation for a great marriage. We just don't do that. So they just don't have that vision. So I think, teaching them that is such an important part.
That's really good.
I oftentimes think of the airplane, and the equipment drops down and it says, you got to take care of yourself first. Put that mask on yourself, and then the child, so on and so forth. And this the same principle just applies. It looks like, you show up in a relationship. It's a relationship, and really, you can't do anything for the other person. You got to do your work. We talk about getting our baggage down to carry-on size. It never goes away. But if you can get that down to carry-on size, you can be available to actually attune to or serve others, rather than using others to get our needs met in unhealthy ways, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about in marriage.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love Gary Thomas, one of my favorite authors, and he made such a profound statement that man just so impacted me. Going, the reality is there's not a single verse in the Bible that says that we need to find someone who will love us. It only says that we are to love. And the truth is that God has already met my need to be loved 100%. And instead of trying to get Erin to love me, if I really can understand that God's already met that need in my life, and here's what that means, and here's what that looks like, then I can spend all my time loving her instead of trying to get her to love me. Well, that's profound. Like, I wish we just don't do a great job of teaching then our kids and our this younger generation. Well, what does that mean? Literally mean, but that is a profound truth. I don't need to find someone who will love me. That God's already done that, and instead I can really learn then how to love. That's my true calling.
That's beautiful.
It's hard to believe, but fall will be here soon. I know some of us have just started summer over here in the Pacific Northwest, so don't cringe when I say this. But as you start thinking about back to school, I want to encourage you to think about how you can be praying for your kids this next school year. We are parenting in a world that feels unsteady and confusing. Our kids are facing issues that we have never thought of before, especially those of us who are older and what we grew up with. While our ever-changing world wants to mark our kids' childhood with these things, God wants to mark them with a faith that transforms their lives from the inside out. So whether you're feeling excited or anxious about this upcoming school year, maybe your kids are going into middle school and you've got those normal anxieties, or maybe heading into kindergarten, wherever they're at, the highs and lows this year, meet it with prayer. The Christian Parenting 2023-2024 Prayer Journal is now available. So Marked by Prayer is a prayer journal for Christian parenting that was created just for you. This journal will guide you in praying for your kids every week of the school year. Each week presents a new topic to journal about. Topics include things like generosity and self-discipline, salvation, godly friendships, and more. So join us as we pray for our kids and that they would be marked by God. Visit cpgive.org to request your school year prayer journal, Marked by Prayer. Again, that's cpgive.org. Request your copy of Marked by Prayer today. You can also listen to Pardon the Mess podcast each Monday to listen to your guided prayer and reflections that follow the journal. It's a hand-in-hand combination, and we are so grateful to partner with Christian Parenting. Get your prayer journal today.
We're nailing a number of principles here that are just being drawn out that you're talking to about helping couples have a thriving marriage. What are some of the other things that you and Erin talk about that just kind of secrets that unlock this for them to give them the how? Because they can get the what just by Googling things on their iPhone. But the how and the wisdom connection is what you guys are all about as well. Mm-hmm. Tell us, what are some of the other things that come to your mind to equip these younger couples?
I think for Erin and I, we now understand the importance of learning how to repair conflict when it happens. I always tell people a pet peeve of mine is we use the phrase conflict resolution in as if a lot of the conflict we go through in marriage can be quote unquote resolved. It's not. You think about most of what we're going to argue about and disagree on is probably stuff based on our personalities. I'm an introvert. Erin's an extrovert. Well, that's not going to change. In spite of her prayers for me to become an extrovert, that's not going to happen. Or just lifestyle differences. Erin loves having every light on in our home at the same time. And it drives me crazy. And just you think, the temperature. I mean, you think about all that stuff that it doesn't require solution, but it does require us to repair when we have that sort of experience. Mm-hmm. And repair means I'm not focused on a solution. It means that I go back. Well, let me give you an example. So we're driving in the car, and I was driving and this car cut me off. Like it was such a stupid thing for this driver to do. So I gave this driver a really bad look. I promise. I didn't show fingers. I didn't do anything. Just kind of like, really? Well,
Really?
Erin
Yeah.
says, you gotta, please don't do that. Please stop. And she starts correcting my driving. And I didn't like that. And so we get into it to the point that I even said to her, listen, here's the deal. Like, if you don't like how I'm driving, just turn and, face the window. Like, you don't even have to watch. Like, you can close your eyes, look at something else. Like, totally terrible. I mean, that's
brilliant. That's just a brilliant idea, Greg.
That works so well. And so obviously we were very disconnected. And later on that night, I went to her and what I've learned to do, because I'm a conflict avoider. So I don't really like dealing with that kind of stuff. But what I've learned is the value of repairing. So I went to her and said, hey, in the car, is there anything that I need to repair? And, she gave me that look like, seriously, like, really, you have to ask, like, why don't you just repair what you, that kind of thing. But
it sounds so familiar.
Golly, yeah. So it's not trying to fix or solve it. It's going, Erin, when I said look out the window or close your eyes, whatever I said, how did that make you feel? Well, I felt disrespected. I felt whatever, invalidated, felt controlled, whatever. And just caring about that, man, that makes sense. Yeah, I imagine. And her doing the same thing, hey, when I was telling you how to behave around that other driver, what was that like? Well, it made me feel this way. And that's what we've just learned to do. And we're not perfect at it, but we certainly now, we can recognize when we're disconnected. And one of us will just go to the other, hey, what do we need to repair here? And that just puts us into a mind frame of going, let's care about how the other person felt. And that's usually what's needed, not some elaborate solution. So that if we have to learn to do that, we've got to learn to repair the conflicts, right? Because they're inevitable. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it reminds me of some research, and I can't credit anyone right now because I can't think of who it's from, but it's basically the research that says that you can tell the health of a marriage based on the time it takes between when there's conflict and the repair versus, having less conflict throughout the life of a marriage. It's really about the time it takes to repair. The healthier we get, the quicker we are to say, yeah, that didn't feel right. What part did I play in that, and owning it? So I love that you're speaking to that.
Yeah, John Gottman.
I was wondering if that was Gottman's. Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I think I think another one is that we're all busy. We've got a lot going on. And one of the things that I've learned is that in terms of our communication, and maybe this is true for you guys as well, but it seems like a lot of Erin and I, as we talk throughout the day, it's like a business meeting. We call it work talk. Who's picking up who's running the store. I mean, just before I got on with you guys, Erin was like, hey, you got to run to the post office. I need this thing overnighted. And so we have to do that because it takes a lot to manage a marriage and a family. The problem is that none of us got married so we could sit in a perpetual board meeting, in a work talk session. I mean, it just, we start to avoid talking when we just think all we're going to do is just do some, deal with tasks or whatever. And so what Erin and I have learned is that we also have to be intentional to have moments that we're exploring the inner life of our spouse. In other words, I have to be intentional to find out, to stay updated, to keep current on how's Erin doing? How's she feeling? What is she stressed out about? What's she dreaming about? What's working in her life? What's not working in her life? I mean, that takes such intentionality that unless we set time aside every day, we will never do that. And I love the old rock group Journey. I don't know if you guys remember Journey.
Oh, yeah. Love Journey.
Oh, yeah.
A good song called Faithfully. And in there it says that I get the joy of rediscovering you. And that's the right mindset, that I need to understand that my wife is always changing. I wrote an article called "The 4 Women That I've Been Married to, All Named Erin." Right? Because who Erin was in her 20s is very different than 30s and 40s and now into our 50s. And I want to constantly be thinking, how am I rediscovering her? And we've learned that at the end of the night, and again, because our work schedules allow for this, but at the end of the night, let's just take 10 minutes and all we do is say, hey, what was the high of your day and what was the low of your day? And then we go, and what's a need to know? Because, sometimes there's stuff that I probably need to tell her that I'll forget about. And so we just include that one in there. But I'm telling you, that is such a helpful way to keep us current and updated, is just to, what happened today that you loved? What was hard about today? And I'm always going, man, whoa, I had no idea you were even dealing with that or whatever. Yeah. And so that's just become a super easy way for us just to make sure that we're staying current with each other. Because otherwise we're going to drift, and we see that couples just drift apart. And all of a sudden you feel like you're married to your roommate. You're married to a stranger in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's funny because I'll find myself saying, every few weeks, you don't know me. You don't know. I feel so alone. These are the deep wounds of my childhood that come flaring out. And honestly, the solution is so simple, is this little exercise. Tell me a high and a low and something you need to know. And all of a sudden that's filled. And I'm like, wow, you're my best friend again. And if it goes longer than 2 weeks, a month, right? 2 months, and eventually you're roommates. And I think you're speaking to something that a lot of couples really struggle with and just don't have the tools or the know-how or to realize it's more normal than not. And you recently wrote a book about moving from roommates. Talk a little bit more about this book specifically and what you hope couples will get from it.
Yeah, it's called Reconnected. It came out right as COVID hit, which is the best time to release a book when there's a worldwide pandemic. So that was fun. But really, it was as we would interview, because my wife is a marriage therapist. So that's all she does is do marriage therapy. That's her job. And so we would hear this a lot just from couples just going, love them, committed to them, but feel like we're nothing more than married roommates. So we started thinking, I wonder why. Is it the same for everybody? And what we found, there were 10 big reasons why couples feel that disconnected. For some, it's just we're in a busy season. For others, they're exhausted. They have, new kids or brand new kids. They have very young kids, and whatever. Or like for us right now, we just moved my wife's 85-year-old dad out here to the Springs, and we feel exhausted. I mean, we're both working full time, and throughout the day, I'm getting texts on, hey, I can't get this remote to work, or, I need help moving this, or can you, which is, we want to do that, but we're exhausted,
Yes.
So that'll create, if I don't have something to give, that's going to disconnect Erin and I. Conflict, poorly managed conflict will disconnect us, feeling unsafe. I love how, Terry, you were talking about that. I agree with you that I think everybody deeply longs to be seen, to be known. And yet if you're not feeling safe with your spouse, well, you're probably not going to open up to be known, to be seen, because you don't feel safe. So a bunch of reasons like that we were finding. So really the whole book is just each chapter is a different, here's one on busyness, here's one on spiritual disconnection, here's one on poorly managed conflict, to where all we were trying to do is to go, okay, if this is the issue, here's the simple solution on how you can then reconnect around that stuff. Because the whole book was really going, how can we help couples reconnect? Because a reconnected couple is able to be used by the Lord for something greater. And that's one of my favorite truths about marriage, is that, man, when a husband and wife come together, that's a synergy unlike, I think, any other force on earth. What Erin and I can do together is far greater than anything we could have done alone. And yet, if we're not connected, there is no way that we're going to be dreaming about, hey, how do we use our marriage, to love others or to serve God in whatever way that looks like. And so we were just hearing from a lot of couples going, man, we want to use our marriage to help others, but we're not, and we don't know why. And I believe it's because they're just so disconnected. And so that's why I believe that a connected marriage is now able to then be used, to figure out, okay, what are we dreaming about together? How can we use our marriage to bless others? Because at the end of the day, that is a blast when Erin and I figure that out and are doing it like you guys. I mean, this podcast is a great example, right? Of you guys using your individual talents and gifts, but also your marriage to really bless others. And you wouldn't be doing that if you were totally disconnected.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It is a blast. I love that it's a vision.
Shared meaning.
Shared meaning, as the Gottmans use it. Yeah, but it takes a lot of work to get there. And then the sound house, right? The being able to build up a marriage to get to that place takes a lot of intentional work. And so it sounds like a great book, a very practical book for couples called Reconnected with Dr. Greg and Erin Smalley. There's one last resource I would love for you to speak to before we close. I'm thinking about the couples who are really just they're at their end. They've tried everything. They've tried counseling. They've tried the books. They're like, I'm working on being healthy, but my spouse isn't. That's the common one, right? Like I've done my part, but they haven't. I think Focus has a resource for couples who are really needing that intensive work. Would you be willing to speak to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's called Hope Restored. And so we've been doing this for the past 20 years. We've seen over 11,000 couples kind of go through this 4-day long, what we call a marriage intensive, but it's a marriage ER. It's just for couples who are really, really struggling, feel stuck. And what we're able to do is to help them drive to what's really going on here. And because oftentimes if we're seeing, a counselor for an hour, once a week, it's just really hard to drive to that really deep, what's really going on here. And so that's why we developed that program. And it's just been amazing to see what God's done through it. And Erin and I were part of that original team that developed that. And we got to do that together. And to see the miracles that God does. I mean, there were times where I'd be leading one of those groups going, there is no way. There's no way. And to see what can happen in as short as 4 days to really help a couple get unstuck and to figure some things out and to develop a plan to move forward is just incredible. And again, it's called Hope Restored. You can go to hoperestored.com and find, we've got, we've got 3 retreat centers around the country, but we're opening up one in Phoenix and one in Dallas. And so it's fun to see that expanding because we all get to those places where we just get into a season that's beyond what we can manage on our own. And I love that there's a place that a couple can come to really get that help that they're looking for and wanting.
Yeah. I've actually used Hope Restored many times when I've been in that weekly work with a couple and them needing that extra dose charge to be able to get unstuck, pulled away from their life, the stressors, and to really spend those 4 intensive days around their marriages. And yes, like you said, the miracles that happen. So we'll include that in the show notes. And then where can people find you and your resources?
Yeah. Come to focusonthefamily.com. There's the marriage tab that just has all this stuff that we've been talking about. Erin and I started a new podcast called Crazy Little Thing called Marriage as well. And that's been fun. So we get to do what you guys are doing and we have so much fun just interviewing people and like you, just being real and honest about our struggles and our triumphs and all of that. So it's fun.
I love it. Good. So we'll include that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Smalley, and the gift that you and Erin have been, and just your honesty, even about the reality of your own family. And, life is hard, but God is good. And there are so many things He's working and moving through us despite our stories, and there's hope for marriages. So I loved it. The bottom line was, don't be afraid to get help, period.
Right.
That's what I heard the most today.
Yeah, good word. Good word. Thanks again, Greg. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if you're looking for resources, maybe marriage coaching, or you're wanting to come to do your work to become a healthier leader, go to livingwholehearted.com. If you're in the Portland, Oregon area, we've got professional counselors who can come alongside you in your own marriages as well. And then if you're around the country, we would love to serve you and your community any way we can as you continue to grow into the leader that you would follow.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.